I only read one book, but it's a good book, don't you know? I act the way I act because the good book tells me so. If I want to know how to be good, it's to the good book that I go. Because the good book is a book, and it is good, and it's a book.
And in a conspicuous departure from the storyline, in part due to unforeseen and at the time still ongoing contractual negotiations with Joseph's management agents over the size of his tent and a percentage of the royalties and merchandising income rather than a set one-off appearance fee, it came to pass at that time that Judah went down from his brethren and turned into a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira, by getting changed in a telephone box into a costume which did have the underwear on the outside, and those that did see him did not recognize him, for he did wear a pair of spectacles as a disguise, and it was his secret identity. And Judah saw there a daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, and she was in distress, having broken off one of her high heels. And he took her, and went in unto her. And she conceived, and bare a son, and he called his name because he wasn't very imaginative, and that was the response he gave when asked what his son's name would be. And she conceived again, because he did go in unto her yet again, and bare a son, and she called his name Onan, because after the mess Judah had made of naming their first child, she wasn't leaving it to chance, lest he be named. Can you repeat the question? And she yet again conceived, because Judah did go in unto her like she was a set of revolving doors, and bare a son, and called his name Shelah, and he was rather gender confused, as well as Australian, and he did like drinking sweet white wine, and did dress in pink, and he, presumably meaning Judah, was at Chezib, when she bare him, which was Judah's way of saying that Shelah was no son of his. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, whose name was Tamar, because, as his name would suggest, he was quite hesitant, and if they did wait for him to take a wife on his own, they would have a very long wait. And Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, which, going by the standards set down by his father, who did conspire with his brethren to murder his own stepbrother, and then did suggest that they should sell him into slavery to a group of neighbouring tribesmen before covering up the deed to his father, and then did have 3 children with a Canaanite woman, even though it wouldst have his father and his forefathers before him, spinning in thine graves, must have made him the kind of wicked that did require him to paint himself red and carry a pitchfork around at all times. Though the situation wasn't made any better by the fact that the name that his father Judah had given him, when spelt backwards, was in fact the Hebrew word for wicked. So that, in this case, the statement is indeed literally true if this narrative is read backwards, which is where those that would be righteous with the Lord will in centuries to come get the idea of playing thrash metal songs backwards to listen to the messages from Satan, who is a major villain that shall be encountered much later on in this book series, but who at this point in time nobody has ever heard of. And the Lord slew him, presumably in person, casting a thunderbolt down from on high, leaving but a pair of smouldering sandals and a greasy black mark on the ground, and a cloud of smoke that did smell like a burnt offering. And Judah, who wasn't one to not get his money's worth, and who couldn't just be asked to go find another wife for his second-born, said unto Onan, Go in unto thy brother's wife, and marry her, and raise up seed to thy brother. And Onan knew that the seed should not be his, for knowing thine own brother's widow is just wrong. But even though he would be doing all of the work, and it would be his marksmanship involved in hitting the target, the child would be credited to his brother, who had been cold in the ground pushing up on an oak tree for some time now. And it came to pass, when he went in unto his brother's wife, that he spilled it on the ground, dropping his change in what is known in the business as a money shot, and what would be known in centuries to come by those who would call themselves Catholics as adequate preventative contraception, lest that he should give seed to his brother, because if knowing thine brother's wife isn't bad enough, giving thine seed to thine brother is even worse. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord. For he did empty his sack in a most explosive manner, and the Lord did get splashed with it. And it shall be known for generations that a man's seed shall be especially difficult to remove from clothing, and will lead to all kinds of trouble, especially if the clothing involved is a blue dress and the person wearing it is rather dumpy-looking and Jewish. And Onan did claim that he did not have sexual relationships with that woman, and went back to smoking his cigar, wherefore the Lord did slew him also, appearing as if out of nowhere, taking a run-up from 40 paces away, and belting him full in the face with a coal shovel so hard that it did leave a recognizable impression of Onan's surprised expression upon the shovel's blade. Then said Judah to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, Remain a widow at thy father's house, till Shelah my son be grown. For he said, Lest peradventure he die also. For Shelah had not yet hit puberty, and discovered the pleasures of masturbation, as his brethren did. For at this point going in unto thou appears to be rather bad for a man's health, and wanking doth at best make us thou blind, if it does not get thee killed. And Tamar went and dwelt in her father's house. And in process of time the daughter of Shua, Judah's wife, died, having been caught by the Lord pleasuring herself with a foot-long rubber dong. And Judah was comforted, and went up unto his sheep-shearers in Timna, he and his friend Hira, the Adullamite, who, if the first verse is taken literally, was Judah's alter ego, which doth make us the reader imagine that none of them would afterwards sit comfortably for a week, considering that at this point in the narrative the synonym for having sexual intercourse had changed from getting to know someone to going in unto them. And it was told Tamar, saying, Behold, thy father-in-law goeth up to Timna to shear his sheep, which is also another name for it. And she put her widow's garments off from her, and covered her with a veil, and wrapped herself so that she did resemble a ninja, and sat in an open place, which is by the way to Timna, which, considering that she was dressed as a ninja, made no difference at all, as it did render her invisible, which in centuries to come will be the effect, if not the intention, for at least half of the population of the region being dressed in a veil also. For she saw that Shelah was grown, and she was not given unto him for a wife. When Judah saw her, he thought her to be a harlot, because she had covered her face, because naturally, when a man who lives in a desert region sees a woman alone in the open who doth wear a veil covering her from head to foot, with only her eyes showing, this is going to be his first impression. And he turned unto her by the way, and said, Go to, I pray thee, let me come in unto thee. Which, as icebreakers go, is the equivalent of walking into a stranger's house at mealtime, sitting down at the table and saying to the people sat around in still silence, So what's for dinner then? And should a man in centuries to come walk up to a woman in the street who is dressed from head to toe in a veil and ask the same question, he shall be lucky if he does escape with his stones intact and not crushed, so that they doth have a sack full of gravel. For he knew not that she was his daughter-in-law, nor that she was in fact even a woman for that matter. And she said, What wilt thou give me, that thou mayest come in unto me? And though money had been invented, he said, I will send thee a kid from the flock. And she did look upon him, and said, I takest all major credit cards. And when he did look at her, like thy dog doth look at thou whenest thou doth try explaining a thing called trigonometry to it, she did think for a moment, and did say, Wilt thou give me a pledge till thou send it? And he said, What pledge shall I give thee? And she said, Well, how about money? And when she did see that he still did not understand, she said, Thy signet, and thy bracelets, and thy staff that is in thine hand. For it was long and hard, with a large bulbous purple end. And he did give it her, especially the staff that was in his hand, and came in unto her. And she conceived by him, for condoms had not yet been invented. And having got the kind of kid she was wanting, and having been able to conceal her identity for the full 3 minutes it did take Judah to get the job done, she arose, and went away, and put aside her secret identity, and laid by her veil from her, and put on the garments of her widowhood. And Judah, who did miss his signet ring, his bracelets, and especially his shaft that he did often hold in his hand, sent the kid by the hand of his friend, the Adullamite, to receive his pledge from the woman's hand, but he found her not, or that was at least what his friend did tell his wife. Then he asked the men of that place, because they would obviously know, saying, "Where is the harlot that was openly by the wayside?" And they said, "There was no harlot in this place." And they did look nervously at their wives, who did scowl in a disapproving way, and a great silence did descend upon many households that night. And he returned to Judah, and said, "I cannot find her, though this may have been because she was dressed head to foot in a veil, as a ninja. And also the men of the place said that there was no harlot in this place." And Judah said, "Let her take it to her," which did mean, "Let her have what I have already given her, lest we be shamed, and be questioned by the local police for curb-crawling around the town's red-light district in an ox cart, asking for the whereabouts of harlots. Behold, I sent this kid, and thou hast not found her, even though thou didst spend a great many hours looking." And it came to pass, about 3 months after, that it was told Judah, saying, "Tamar thy daughter-in-law hath played the harlot, and also, behold, she is with child by whoredom." And Judah, who did at this time see no connection, did say, "Bring her forth, and let her be burnt," for that was how they did perform abortions in these times. And though he did have no problem using their services, Judah was indeed a righteous man at heart, and did know that harlots should be set on fire. And lo, as a righteous man who would do the bidding of the Lord, in his spare time, late at night, he did venture round certain parts of town in his ox cart, and invite the harlots within, and they would never be seen again. Yet, when she was brought forth, with a wry grin on her face, she sent to her father-in-law, saying to those assembled, "By the man whose these are, am I with child." And she said, "Discern, I pray thee, whose are these? The signet, the bracelets, and staff." And though he might have been the first of God's righteous servants to have been caught banging a hooker, he would most certainly not be the last. And lo, in centuries to come, having to resign as the pastor of thine church, because it had become known that thee did go with harlots and prostitutes, will be viewed as quite tame, considering that it will be equally common that thou would instead be caught touching the choir boys, or snorting crystal meth out of a male escort's arse-crack. And Judah acknowledged them, and said, "She hath been more righteous than I, because that I gave her not to Shelah my son, though, strangely enough, not for going off with prostitutes or knocking up thine daughter-in-law." And he knew her again no more, which is just as well, because for a man to know his daughter-in-law even just once, especially when the knowing is the kind of knowing that doth go on in the Bible, is not exactly something that is considered to be particularly righteous. And it came to pass, in the time of her travail, that, behold, twins were in her womb. And lo, in a way that, once again, doth nothing to dispel the well-known stereotype, Judah did get 2 sons for the price of 1. And it came to pass, when she travailed, in a birth that can only be described as being written about by one who has never before seen a woman give birth, does know nothing about female anatomy, and who doth assume that the unborn child doth rattle round within the mother's abdomen, that in a surreal moment, in a scene reminiscent of one which might appear in a horror movie, the one put out his hand, and the midwife took and bound upon his hand a scarlet thread, saying, "This came out first." And it came to pass, as he drew back his hand, that, behold, his brother came out. And she said, "How hast thou broken forth? This breach be upon thee." For Tamar, after being known by her first husband, and then his brother, until it did kill him, and having taken on the role of the harlot, and been known by her father-in-law, she did have a vagina like a Wellington boot, with a birth canal wide enough for one child to pass by another with ease. Therefore his name was called Pharez, for the word doth mean breach. And afterward came out his brother, that had the scarlet thread upon his hand, marking him as the firstborn, and denoting his birthright, and his name was called Zara, which doth mean rise, and who, in this story at least, would have probably come out first, had it turned out that he would have a line of rather more famous descendants, rather than his brother. And late at night, many years in the future, the Lord did once again visit the old man who did write the narrative, in his tent out in the desert, and he did return unto him the bottle of hand lotion and box of tissues that he had borrowed. And the man did ask him if he had found the story to his satisfaction, and the Lord did agree that he was indeed most satisfied. Yet he was somewhat puzzled at why the man would consider that, in the narrative, the Lord would be angry at a man who would spill his seed upon the ground. And the man did say that he had heard the Lord say himself that wrestling with one's own serpent, beating thine ape, or polishing one's own staff was indeed so good that it should truly be a sin. And he had written it down on the long list with all the other things that the Lord did find an abomination within his sight, such as wearing socks with sandals, eating pickled whelks, and dressing small dogs in clothes, so that they did look cute. And the Lord did say unto him, No, not at all. And he did point out that had he not wanted man to seek the comfort of Mrs. Thumb and her 4 daughters, he would have made man's arms shorter, as he had so done by giving man one less vertebra that was necessary for him to be able to perform autofellatio. Yet he did have to agree that his son Jesus, who was indeed the right hand of the Lord, did get a little tired, and would go away from his side, saying that he did feel dirty and used, and when he did see him again, he did smell strongly of a thing called bleach. And the man did look unto the Lord, and with great disbelief said unto him, You get Jesus to wank you off? And the 2 of them did sit there, and a great silence did descend upon them, and the Lord did wish that he had yet invented football, so that they may talk about it.